Good morning and welcome to Aging Reimagined. My name is Kay Lazar and I'm a health and science reporter at the Boston Globe. Glad to see everyone here. I am joined by three very distinguished panelists. I'm very excited about that, who are working on the cutting edge of aging and what we can do to increase our health span, the amount of time we live a healthy life. So I want to introduce our panelists. I'm going to read this so I get it right. Closest to me is Dr. Didi Tobias. She's an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School and an epidemiologist at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Next to Didi is Dr. Courtney Miller. She's an assistant scientist at Hebrew Senior Life and Marcus Institute and an instructor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And to the far left there is Dr. Bruce Yankner. He's a professor of genetics and neurology at Harvard Medical School. So we wanted to start with something very basic, because we all tend to think of aging as like creaky joints, gray hair, can't run as fast as I used to. But what's driving that? Why are we aging? And so scientists think there are at least a dozen main things that are driving aging. So the first question I wanted to ask our panelists was, if you could pick one thing that's going on in our biological stew inside of us that's driving aging, and that research is really moving the needle on, that is making progress on, what would it be and why? So I'm going to start with Didi.
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm not really clinging to any one specific marker or pathway quite yet, but I think really just the plain Jane chronic disease prevention for me sums up a lot of what we are exploring and trying to understand about aging. And given so much of it is preventable with what, again, we already know, healthy diet, activity, and having access to sort of preventative care, it seems that can prevent the bulk of these sort of chronic conditions that we tend to accumulate as we age. And if preventing that gives us a longer health span, that would be, I think, something important to tap into next.
Courtney.
Well, I think what's really interesting about these hallmarks of aging is that they're all interrelated. But if I had to hang my hat on one, it would probably be the gut microbiota. So if you're not familiar, there are trillions of bacteria and other small organisms that are living in the lining of your intestines that directly affect your health. And what's so fascinating is, even though that we've been researching this area for decades, is that we're just really scratching the surface and identifying the microorganisms and the functions that they do. And to that end, we actually haven't even identified all the microorganisms there. So I think that's a really interesting area of potential. And, it directly communicates to the brain. So I think that's what I would say.
And Bruce.
So as Courtney just said, the various hallmarks are all linked into sort of ecosystem of aging. If I had to pick one that cuts across all the diseases of aging, it would be inflammation, which is both a cause and a manifestation of many of the pathological processes.
Okay. So I'm sure there's going to be questions about that, how we can moderate that or mediate it, et cetera. So I wanted to then go into a question about each of these panelists' work, because they're each doing very cutting edge research that really gets at an aspect or two of aging and how it might be addressed, which I think is what really a lot of people are interested in. So let's start with Courtney on this one, because I just can't resist saying tart cherry juice.
Does anyone here care about sleep? Yeah, I think it's probably the most important thing to me. I'm in bed by 8 p.m. every single night. And so I think that sleep is a really important part of aging. A lot of older adults, as they grow older, are sleeping less. They're waking up more. It's harder to fall asleep or harder to fall back asleep. And so I study nutrition, and I'm really interested in kind of finding the foods or dietary patterns that actually physiologically change certain pathways that might help with certain conditions. And so there are these 2 studies that were very small, and they looked at drinking tart cherry juice for insomnia in older adults. And these Montmorency cherries are specific to the northern Michigan region, and they are supposedly the berry or cherry or fruit that has the most natural melatonin in it. And so they thought, okay, let's have people drink this tart cherry juice and see what happens with sleep. And in this small group of older adults who drank tart cherry juice, who self-reported insomnia, they found that it actually increased time asleep. And so what we wanted to do is not only replicate those findings, but also comprehensively look at the mechanisms that might be responsible. And so, although these tart cherries have a lot of natural melatonin, which is really important for the sleep-wake cycle, it's not nearly enough that is analogous to taking a melatonin supplement. So there might be other things in the tart cherry juice that might be impacting sleep. So we're investigating pathways related to magnesium, control of cortisol, and stress. And also my favorite semi-nutrient are flavonoids. And these are antioxidant compounds that are found in fruits and vegetables that have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory pathways. So they might be helping mediate their response to pain and help reduce pain to help people sleep better. So right now we just finished recruitment of that study, and so we're busy analyzing the data, and I hope to share with you what we find.
I'm curious, how much tart cherry juice did people drink?
Great question. So you can do it in a few different ways. They actually have tart cherry juice gummies, which I have not really explored well, but there's a concentrate of tart cherry juice that you can actually, it's like concentrated juice, really. They evaporate some water out of it, or you can have the actual tart cherry juice. It is tart, like the name says. And so we had people drink 8 fluid ounces of tart cherry juice at 5 p.m. and an hour before bed, which is one of the unique things about our study. The other 2 studies were having them drink tart cherry juice in the morning. And I was thinking, well, if it's going to help us sleep, why do I want to go to sleep in the morning? So that's something that we changed. And what we were worried about is if it would actually impact like nocturia, but we didn't see any evidence of that. So that's good.
I'm guessing you didn't have any problem recruiting people to this study.
You know what? It's been the easiest recruitment because everyone cares about sleep.
For sure. Bruce, you had a very interesting study published a few weeks back that we wrote about and were swamped with reader questions and just fascinated. So it's about Alzheimer's and potential way to address it. If you can explain that study.
So about 10 years ago, we were studying a neuroprotective protein in the brain called REST, and we found that one way to activate this protein to protect cells was through a signaling pathway, which is called Wnt. And a classic way of activating Wnt in cells is to add very high concentrations of lithium. And so we started doing that in a variety of systems and found that in animal models it appeared that high doses of lithium could reverse all the manifestations of Alzheimer's disease in those models, including the behavioral ones, by restoring memory. And this had been observed to a varying extent by others in the past, but it was so pervasive that at one point we wondered whether lithium itself could be part of the disease mechanism. And problem with that is that lithium was now thought to be a natural substance, just a drug with pharmacological effects at very high doses, typically used in psychiatry for bipolar disorder. But we went on to determine by adapting technology to make it very sensitive that lithium was indeed naturally present in the brain and throughout the body, and that its levels dropped precipitously at the earliest stages of cognitive decline in the aging population, condition called mild cognitive impairment, and became more profound in patients with Alzheimer's. We then recapitulated this in mice by actually taking lithium out of their diet at 90%. And that dropped the levels in the blood quantitatively by a similar amount, but in the brain only dropped it by about half. But that was enough to really spur the pathology of Alzheimer's disease, the plaques, the tangles, the inflammation, and accelerate memory loss. And we found that one of the reasons lithium was being depleted in the brain was it was binding to the amyloid deposits. And when we were able to give a form of lithium that could evade that, which we found through a chemical screen, we could rescue the pathology in those animal models, as well as in normal aging mice, and markedly improve their memories. So it gives rise to a hypothesis that one common mechanism for Alzheimer's may be loss of lithium very early in the disease, either through environmental exposure, binding to the pathology of the disease, or genetic causes, and that may give rise to many of the downstream features of the disease. And this was a very attractive hypothesis to me because I've been working on this disease for well over 25 years, and one of the confusing aspects about it is the very diverse manifestations, which has divided people into camps: the amyloid camp, the tau camp, the inflammation camp. And so the idea that there could be a parsimonious mechanism giving rise to all of these things is attractive, but it remains to be determined by future scientific investigations whether this is in fact the case.
So when you say lithium, people imagine, oh, lithium is given for some mental health conditions. Are we talking about the same lithium, and those are pretty high doses? Talk a little bit about that.
So the metal is the same, but the form in which it's delivered can be quite different. So lithium, typically given as a salt called lithium carbonate, is a standard of treatment for for bipolar disorder, type 1 bipolar disorder especially. And it's given at a dose which is about 1,000 times what the natural level is. So we found, at least in our animal models, that you can replace lithium with this other form, lithium orotate, that evades the plaques with a dose close to the physiological range, approximately 1,000-fold lower than what is used in psychiatry, with quite dramatic effects in the model system. So there are similarities, but there are very major differences.
So where do you go from here with that finding? Is there a clinical trial planned, or what's the next steps with this?
So at two levels. First, we're trying to advance the science. Lithium orotate is very attractive, but it's not the end of the story. And we're looking for ways to both augment its effect, as well as using our drug discovery platforms to see if there's something better out there. And in addition, we're in the planning stages of a clinical trial, which hopefully will begin in the not too distant future at the Mass General Hospital and the Brigham and Women's Hospital.
And the trial would be with lithium orotate?
Yes, that's right.
And do you have a sense of how large a trial that would be? Thousands of people, or?
Well, I don't want to put a number on that now. There will be an initial dose-finding pilot trial, and then there will be a much larger trial, which will likely be in the thousands.
Okay. Dee Dee.
So I'm from the Division of Preventive Medicine at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. And as I mentioned in my first response, prevention of chronic disease is a key area of research focus. And in our division, over the last decade plus, our faculty have conducted these really large-scale randomized trials in the tens of thousands of participants. And one of the, I think, key resources of conducting a trial that's at the scale that these are, and where participants are given either a placebo or vitamin D or omega-3 or a multivitamin that they take daily for years, is sort of the ability to go back to these existing resources and tap into explore other hypotheses. And so one trial in particular, the VITAL trial, which compared vitamin D, omega-3, and placebo supplements daily for 5 years, were some findings recently on telomere length. And from the original main trial, we saw that with vitamin D compared to placebo, there was a significant reduction in autoimmune disease, a lowering of inflammation, a reduction in fatal cancer, and in some subsets, there was lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes and other chronic diseases. So going back to these data, trying to understand, is there some cross-cutting mechanism of aging related to vitamin D in particular? Telomere length was one hypothesis that our group was able to test. And just to give you a quick recap of your high school biology, the strand of DNA at the very end has what is called a telomere, and that sort of protects all of the real DNA, within your cells, each time it divides. And the analogy is like the little plastic thing on your shoelace to keep it from fraying. Which has a name. It's called an aglet, I found out. And so as we age and our cells are dividing repeatedly over your life course, the telomere length sort of gets chipped away at a little bit over the years. And so as a sort of indicator of your biological age or how many times your cells have divided, it does well at predicting your all-cause mortality, so sort of like incidence of death, your age. And what it means, though, for health is, I think, where there's still a lot of exploration and territory to explore. So with the VITAL trial, we were able to go back and look at everybody's telomere length in their blood samples that they had given before 2 years and 4 years into taking the supplements and participating in this trial. And what was observed was over that follow-up time with vitamin D in particular, that prevented that sort of deterioration of telomere shortening that the placebo group experienced. So we see that, in other populations, if you just follow people over time, measure their telomere length, it's about, over a decade, you lose X amount of telomere length. So that sort of prevented loss that the vitamin D group experienced corresponded to about 3 years of, telomere length life gained. Which is consistent with some of the findings for the actual chronic disease endpoints that we observed in the larger overall trial. So that's, I think, a really exciting use of the existing data first and foremost, but also just adding to what we can interpret about some of these newer biological markers like telomere shortening and other biological clocks, where tying it to actual disease or being able to modify it with an exposure is still sort of a unexplored territory.
How much vitamin D, you may have said that, how much vitamin D were these participants taking?
Yeah, so the supplement was 2,000 IUs per day of cholecalciferol, which is sort of the typical vitamin D supplement you would get at local pharmacy, CVS. And so that was, adherence was pretty good. Again, people didn't know whether they were getting the placebo or the active. So if there was any sort of non-compliance, that might be expected to be similar between the two groups. But that's what they were taking for up to 5 years.
Interesting. Well, this audience question seems to play right into what we were just talking about. The question was, how do we actually measure aging? We need, the person was saying there's a need for functional biomarkers rather than disease biomarkers. People are shaking their heads. Who would like to jump on that about functional biomarkers of aging? Because
I can, just like with the telomere length, for example. So there's biological age, and then there's chronological age, which is, your birthday, and every year everyone ticks up 1 year exactly. But if you took a room of, say, 60-year-olds, and they all had the exact same chronological age, biological age is sort of the variability in these other measures like telomere or DNA methylation or inflammation or whatever it might be that as researchers, we think could correspond to like what maybe your body's biological age could be. So if we look at something like telomere length and you have a room full of 60-year-olds, those with shorter telomeres are in the data that have looked at this, more likely to die earlier or have certain chronic diseases earlier. So that, is one sort of indication of it being a biological marker of your age. So shorter telomeres meaning you're sort of like more advanced in your life and closer to the end of life, I guess, not to be morbid about it. But so there are a number of ways in which, I guess, trying to identify what is the most, I guess, valid or precise biological age metric is, I think, maybe where there's a lot of current exploration.
A lot of debate about what
Yes.
should be in it. Actually, there's another question that came in, and seeing as we just spoke with Bruce, the person is asking, could a treatment for Alzheimer's related to your lithium research be something as simple as an oral supplement of lithium orotate? You knew you were going to get that question.
The short answer is it could, but we'll have to see from the clinical trials. I don't recommend people take lithium orotate or any lithium supplement at this point because we have not determined, at least for lithium orotate, an effective and safe dose in people that needs to be looked at rigorously. The doses given in psychiatry of lithium carbonate are very high, and those patients are very closely monitored for toxicity with blood tests. So this isn't a drug that should be taken in a cavalier manner.
Right, and after our story ran a few weeks ago about your research, I mean, there were people talking about it, because it's all over the internet that you can, So I think that that's really needs to be underscored that a lot of this research is still not at the clinical trial or just beginning at the clinical trial. So don't necessarily try this at home yet. So yeah. Oh, this is an interesting question. So the question is, what role do insights from centenarians, blue zones, or tools like the Brain Care Score play in ongoing aging research and clinical translation? I'm certainly familiar with centenarians and blue zones. I was not familiar with the Brain Care Score. Does anybody want to tackle that one? Go ahead, Bruce.
So a lot of you are familiar with the Blue Zone project, where a team from the National Geographic went to these 5 zones, which were rigorously identified throughout the country, where people routinely live to be over 100, and this is documented by birth certificates and other records. And the incidence of centenarian lifespan is at least tenfold higher than in the U.S. And they identified common lifestyle characteristics. And then they made recommendations to communities in the United States, which is the Blue Care protocol you're talking about. Based on these communities, could you implement these things in your own community? And there's been some success. For instance, so just to back up a bit, there's research originally, I think, out of the CDC, which shows that interventions at the individual level, telling people to be on a diet or go to the gym or whatever, have limited efficacy. People, for instance, who go on a diet, it's been shown that after 7 months, more than 90% of them no longer adhere to it. People join gyms, 2 years later, 70% of them are no longer going. However, it's been shown that community intervention, social policy, is much more effective because it changes how people have to behave. Taking vending machines out of schools, creating more walking paths and bicycle paths. So the physical activity option becomes easier for people and they have to do it. Prompting restaurants to serve fruit rather than French fries with their sandwiches. Things like this, there's actual data showing this makes a difference. And these types of interventions originally derived from these observations of these blue zones, where people who follow these lifestyles have much longer lifespans and health spans, most importantly. They're relatively more free of the chronic diseases of aging, such as diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and so on.
We should all eat more fruit and less French fries for sure.
and have a community and a purpose. I think that
Yes.
was one of the main things of that research is, connecting with people.
There's similar to an earlier question, I wanted to ask Courtney about her work with senolytics, because that's certainly a marker too. And if you could just talk a little bit about I mean, it's very preliminary, but there's a lot of interest in this. What are senescent cells and how do they affect the aging and what you're trying to do about that?
Yeah, so as we all age, we're developing these old senescent cells in our bodies. And what's interesting about these senescent cells is that they're resistant to our regular mechanisms to get rid of those cells. So they kind of just stay there. And they wreak havoc in the body. And we think that these senescent cells are in part drivers of aging and aging diseases and conditions. And there are these compounds that were identified called senolytics that specifically target the elimination of these old senescent cells. So we just ran a trial of only 12 participants. So in its infancy of its research, in older adults with mild cognitive impairment. And our main goal right now is to test the safety and tolerability of these compounds. So we use dasatinib, which is known as a chemotherapeutic, and a flavonoid that you can find in foods, but also as a supplement called quercetin. And so what we found is that first and foremost, that we had demonstrated relative safety in our population. But in our 12 participants, again, small sample, we saw that the MoCA scores, which is an assessment of cognitive function, increased after 12 weeks of intermittent dosing, which was correlated with a reduction in inflammatory marker TNF alpha. But again, these are preliminary. I'm not advocating for anyone to go out and take these because we need to do a lot more trials to understand if these actually work.
I think it's fascinating. We only have less than 3 minutes left, and I wanted to just do a quick lightning round of, we hear a lot about diet, exercise, all of these things we should be doing to slow our aging, live more healthy. There's one thing, or what do you personally do that you feel helps, with your increasing your health span? Dee Dee.
So just this year, I started taking a multivitamin, which I had admittedly never taken. And I don't really know I don't think there was like a data point that drove me to that. But I would say that also having just sat on the dietary guidelines for Americans committee, most Americans, adults take a multivitamin. I think it's 60 to 70%, but very few eat their fruits and vegetables. So don't think of it as a replacement, right? Still get the diet as recommended with whole grains and fruits and vegetables at the same time.
Courtney?
Well, I definitely don't ascribe to drinking tart cherry juice yet. But what I do like to try and implement is making sure that I try to maintain a healthy gut. And one of the things that can help maintain a healthy gut is eating dietary fiber. So, no surprise, I'm going to say try and eat your fruits and vegetables because dietary fiber is something that we don't digest, but the gut microbes actually thrive off of it. So, definitely trying to get my daily fiber intake, which most Americans do not meet.
Interesting. And Bruce?
So I try to get in at least 30 minutes of exercise a day, which in addition to the established cardiovascular benefits is a great stress reliever. And in our society, I think that's important. I actually think stress is one of the major drivers of aging, certainly linked to inflammation.
All good advice. Thank you. I think we have less than a minute left, so I think we're wrapping up. Thank you so much for
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here and join you today at the Boston Globe's Future of Medicine Summit. I'm Dr. Tom Smith. I'm Executive Vice President and Chief Medical Officer at Collegium Pharmaceutical. And on behalf of all of us at Collegium, We're just so grateful for the Boston Globe convening this important gathering, and we're also grateful to be a sponsor of today's program. This morning's sessions have given us a powerful window into where medicine is heading. We began with Dr. Leo and his pioneering work in gene editing, which is really expanding the boundaries of what's possible in treating genetic disease. We heard about the rise of GLP-1 therapies and how these drugs are not only reshaping treatment for obesity and diabetes, but also raising the questions about longevity, food systems, and access to medications. We listened in on Robert Langer's fireside chat, a reminder of how science and entrepreneurship can come together to spark life-changing innovation. And we just explored the cutting edge of aging research, and which challenges us not only to think about how we live longer, but how we live healthier. Taken together, these conversations highlight the incredible pace of scientific discovery, but also the shared responsibility to ensure that advances are equitable, science-based, and patient-centered. At Collegium, that mission resonates profoundly with us. We are deeply committed to building a leading, diversified biopharmaceutical company focused on improving the lives of people living with serious medical conditions. Our emphasis has always been on doing right by our patient and medical communities, and we are dedicated to empowering their decision-making through science-based educational resources. As we close out the morning, I hope you'll carry forward the inspiration from these sessions into the conversations and connections still to come. Because what unites us here today is not just an interest in breakthrough science, but a belief in its potential to improve lives at every stage and in every community. Thank you again for being here. Our heartfelt thank you to our distinguished speakers for sharing their insights, and to the Globe for creating and hosting this important space. We're proud to support it, and we look forward to all that the rest of the day has in store. Thank you very much.